Hey everyone, Rarity Dash here. Time for another Patreon-sponsored blind reaction. And this one comes to you courtesy of Crimson Melody, who has requested that I react to Houseki no Kuni Manga to Anime Differences by PhenomSage. So yeah, Houseki no Kuni, if you are unaware, is the Japanese name of Land of the Lustrous, which is the anime that I just finished last week. And yeah, which I really enjoyed. If you were unaware, if you didn't follow that series, it was amazing. Just one of the most visually impressive anime I've ever seen, and also just a wonderful story with great characters and like some awesome action. I mean, was it episode 10? That was just like some of the best anime action I've seen, just full stop. That was great. It's just a really wonderful series. It needs a second season. It really does. I think that's the biggest drawback that it has, is that it just kind of leaves you unsatisfied with the conclusion. You need you need more. And thanks to Crimson, I mean, we kind of do have more here. I mean, we at least have the show retaining a presence on the channel 1 week later as I start a new series. Through this video, which yeah, we're going to be comparing the anime to the manga, which I have not read the manga. I've seen a few pages, also thanks to Crimson, who showed me some, and he's like a real big super fan of the show, and was one of the people who kind of ultimately convinced me that I needed to watch it, even though he didn't really make like a overt case for it so much, although he did like tell me to watch it, but it was just by like showing me stuff and just seeing his enthusiasm for it. That's kind of what pushed me towards making that decision to really have that be the next show. But yeah, I have seen, the point is I've seen like some images of the manga, and the art is just beautiful. I mean, obviously the anime is beautiful too, but the reason it's so beautiful, the reason they needed to bring out all those 3D effects and everything, was they needed to capture the art, the manga art, which is just so detailed and so just special that the anime had to be special too, I think. And yeah, it definitely was. But I mean, in terms of like story, I'm not really sure what's been removed, what's been altered, that kind of thing. That should be interesting to find out, and just to kind of get a better grasp of how they changed it, I guess. It could be kind of cool. Anyway, not much else to say, so let's just go ahead and get this started. And here we go. Press start. I think I already did. And we got some kind of logo, I'm guessing. PhenomSage. Yeah. Got his own logo.
Hello everybody, I am PhenomSage, and finally, welcome to the Houseki no Kuni Land of the Lustrous manga
Helps to use both titles.
I know a lot of you have been waiting a very long time for this, multiple weeks at this point. Longer than I said it would take. I'm very sorry for the delay. I have been incredibly busy lately, and it was just a matter of finding the time to read through all 32
No, I'm not skipping anything
of the series, take all my notes, make sure I have everything down that I want to say before recording this review. But now we can finally jump in. The Houseki no Kuni chapters 1 through 32 manga comparison.
So the anime covers.
Now, those of you who plan on keeping up with this manga review series all the way into the future chapters, stick around towards the end, because I do have some information and some questions that I want to pose to you guys about how I do this series. But that will of course be saved for the end. Let's just get into this review. I just have to start this whole thing off and say that as far as the anime is concerned, I am baffled by how faithful of an adaptation it was.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Almost 1-to-1 with their manga counterparts, and are in the exact same order, barring a few exceptions in the first and final episode. But despite that, there are still a few decent amount of interesting differences that
the video is 36 minutes, so
I want to talk about.
I would expect so.
On top of all that, give my thoughts on how the adaptation handled translating this manga into episode form, and talk about my praise and issues with the way that it was handled. Just as a side note, I will not be talking about the omake, but just know that I did read through all of them as I was going through these chapters, and they are indeed very funny. And
those look cute.
Some of them in the actual episodes. But no, without further ado, let's just start with these differences, and then once we get through all of the differences, I'll just go over my overall thoughts on the manga as a whole. I do have to preface this by saying that not all of these differences will be just those mind-blowing, drastic changes that I have so much to talk about. In fact, a lot of them are just simple notes that I just felt were worth mentioning, even if they're not necessarily the biggest changes from the way the anime handled them. And of course, I'm not perfect, so I might have missed some differences while reading through. If you know of any that I missed after watching through this video, please tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear any additional changes that I didn't pick up on. Starting directly on chapter 1, we have Foes tidying up her hair in the lake near the school, and you might think, wait, that was in the anime, why are you mentioning this? And the reason I'm mentioning this is because just in the previous page we see Foes with very messy, unkempt hair because she was just laying down in the grass sleeping. And the note that I wanted to make about this is, in CG it is very hard to communicate that messy, unkempt hair. So in the anime, when Foes was tidying up her hair, it was more of an imagination thing, like you're just supposed to picture that she's tidying up her hair, because obviously with the CG model, there's not much they could do with that. Foes' hair is always perfect in the CG model. And this might seem like a nitpick at first, but it ties
Is it actually hair?
Trend that I saw while reading through the manga that I will talk about later, where despite Orange's best efforts, due to the current limitations of CG, they couldn't quite convey all of the nuances that you see in Ichikawa's artwork. Like I said, I have more to say about this, but I will save it for the end. Grouped up.
I mean, why do they even have hair if they're like rock people?
Moving on to just the next page, we see Foes talking to Sensei.
Also, Foes is weird to me.
That was brought up to me multiple times while doing my anime reviews. I never actually mentioned it, but I figured.
I guess in Japanese it would be like.
We see Foes refer to Sensei as Adamant Sensei, and that is because Kongo, which is what he is translated to in the anime, from what I gather, is an untranslated version of adamantite. I saw a lot of people in my comments saying, is Sensei a gem? And while we don't really know his true origins yet, his name does imply that he is a gem. Although what's more interesting about this is the fact that adamantite
why is he so different,
is the only fictional gem seen in our entire cast. The rest of the gems are grounded in our real world, in reality. Adamantite is a fictional gem, which if you've played any JRPGs before, you know that it is commonly referred to as the strongest gem. Moving on a little bit into chapter 1, as Foes and Sensei rush to
sometimes it's the metal, isn't it?
As they're being attacked by the Lunarians, Sensei asks Foes to recite their history, and this is where we get our first look and first knowledge of the origins of this planet, as opposed to the anime where they just began the second episode with some narration explaining the origin. And I'll be honest, I think it's a little bit cooler to have Foes reciting it to Sensei as we're going off to Morganite and Goshnite. It's also with Foes reciting this to Sensei where we get a crucial piece of information that was surprisingly omitted from the anime, where she says that in the process of the 6 moons being created and the Earth being destroyed, that nothing was left of the planet except for a single beach. Now, I assume that all life was probably dead out there, but I was wondering if there were other continents, other pieces of land out there on the planet, and this confirms that no, this beach is the only inhabitable land on the entire Earth. And unfortunately, since the anime didn't
they could have mentioned that,
we didn't get this badass shot of all of the gems forming up to go save Morganite and Goshnite.
Yeah, that is pretty great.
Where Sensei explains why they are in groups of 2 in the first place. Again, this was never brought up in the anime, but according to Sensei, they form up in groups of 2, so that way one can fight and one can keep watch. And all I have to say about this is not very thoroughly followed as we continue into the series.
Yeah.
I would never guess that one of them is supposed to keep watch with the way that these groups of 2 fight the Lunarians in the future. It's always just a duo attack. And it's during this conversation where Sensei is talking about how he's tried to find roles for all of the other gyms that we get into our main plight that we already know about, how he has struggled to find a role for Foes, somebody who seems seemingly inept at every job you throw at her. And it's funny because in the manga we actually see little glimpses of the jobs that give to Foes that she wound up failing at miserably.
That's fun.
My favorite of these is easily the strategy meeting, where Foes drew a nice little happy face place with all of the board pieces.
Yeah,
and I think that's Jade in the corner just really mad. Moving ahead to chapter 2, we get into something that was explored in the anime. This isn't really a difference, but it's something I noticed while reading that I didn't pick up on when I watched that first episode. And that is Cinnabar this whole time has been waiting for the Lunarians to show up so that way she can just be taken. She doesn't want to be on this planet anymore.
Yeah.
But despite waiting so long, they never showed up. And when they finally did, it was because foes had appeared. So essentially, Cinnabar gave up her only wish to be taken by the Lunarians to the moon because she knew if she was taken, nobody would be left to protect foes, and foes would end up taken as well. It's really beautiful, and I wish I'd picked up on that the first time I watched the episode. But I do not think it's all on me. I think a large part of it is due to the way that lines are delivered and translated in the anime, and that is another thing that I will talk about more in depth at the end of this review. Speaking of translations, right in the same scene, when Foes is making that promise to Cinnabar, we see her say, "Fine, then I'll find you a job that's way more fun than the night patrols. A job that only you can do." And this was brought up heavily in the episode 12 finale review, because the way that it was translated in this scene and in the finale scene, it's translated to better work instead of fun work. And a lot of people prefer that fun translation just because they feel like it fits Foes' personality more. And by the time Foes says, "I found you new work, we can do this," Cinnabar remembered every single word and says, "No, you said you would find me fun work." So essentially what you gather from that scene is Foes does not care about the promise anymore because she forgot that what she initially promised to Cinnabar was fun work, not just work. Personally, I feel like the better translation more or less means the same thing.
Yeah.
But I can see where you guys are coming from, where you just don't want that line tampered with because of the nuanced meaning there is behind it. Skipping a chapter and moving directly into
wonder
chapter
what the original
as the Lunarian
Japanese
is
is.
attacking the school, and we see Jade and Euclase just looking up at Bortz as she rushes up to take care of the Lunarians. We see Jade say, "Ah, Bortz is here. Then there's nothing else for us to do. We're fine. Bort will take care of this." And you just get this panel of Daya looking up in sadness because this is directly after we hear how distraught Daya is about how worthless she feels compared to Bort. And in the next panel, we can see Euclase just scolding Jade because she knows about how it affects Daya hearing something like that. And while the anime had these same lines, this is another trend that I saw in the adaptation, where despite adapting these lines and shots one for one, it feels like the team didn't really understand the flow or the meaning behind certain dialogue. Because in this scene in the anime, we don't really get that scene composition that tells us what Euclase is referring to when she's scolding Jade. Her lines are just kind of there in the background with no purpose. And this is a common complaint that I have with the adaptation as a whole, but as I said in the beginning, I will get into more detail with that at the end of this review. Moving along to chapter 5, as Dai is out on the search to find somebody who knows how to fix Foes and change her back to normal, we get the transition into Cinnabar and what she's doing at this time of night, but not before we get a grand shot of 4 of the moons in one panel, which in the anime, the most we ever saw at one time was 2. So it's really interesting that there is a panel in the manga that shows 4 of them all at the same time. Again, skipping along to chapter 6, in the scene where Foes is being reformed with the fragments of gem that they got from the shell. This scene looks completely different as Foes is being reformed. In the anime, we saw almost every single part of her body being formed individually, whereas in the manga, it's a lot weirder. We see a hand reach out from a void, and make some kind of substance from their finger, and form Foes' entire body. Now, obviously, this isn't literal or what happened to form Foes' body back, but there is actually a very interesting similarity between this and just a few pages back, where we saw Cinnabar's Mercury forming a Foes lookalike. I feel like this might even be intentional and almost symbolize Cinnabar giving purpose to Foes' life. And I feel like this is even further reinforced as we see in the very last panel before Foes wakes up, a long-haired individual walk away from the hole in the void that was creating Foes in the first place. Moving ahead a large margin to chapter 11 after Foes has gotten her new legs. She still can't walk on them and everybody is trying to comfort her and help her out. And as we knew from this scene, because Foes lost her legs, she forgot Jade. And despite not being manga only, I feel like I should highlight this because it's not as apparent in the anime. As they're walking off, Euclase is just patting Jade on the shoulder as we see that Jade is just very visibly upset that Foes forgot her, and that just makes me feel even worse for Jade.
Aww.
I'll always remember you, Jade, don't worry. But more interesting than that, this scene, during the anime, you'll recall that Alex was actually a part of
more
this,
attention.
talking about wanting to know about these new Lunarians and eventually being dragged off. But in this scene in the manga, she is nowhere to be seen.
Okay.
Alex isn't really introduced until the next volume. So that's
interesting.
Change. I don't think Ichikawa knew that she wanted to involve Alex heavily in the story yet, but since the anime had that knowledge ahead of time, they decided to just give her an extra appearance here, so she just didn't pop up out of nowhere in the future. Later on in this same scene where Foes finally learns how to stand and move her agate legs, we get an extra piece of dialogue where she says, "Dang it, you tantalizing little inclusions. That's why I like you, because they finally worked and they developed a compatibility with a material that was thought to be incompatible." Now, this extra piece of dialogue isn't really that huge, doesn't really tell us anything more than Foes just being happy, but it does really
pretty cute.
Get me into more speculation about Foes and her inclusions. Why are they compatible?
Tantalizing little inclusions.
What is it about Foes that just allows itself to
It
connect
is interesting.
Everything, no
she can
problem? I feel like this will be a major revelation in the future, and I'm so excited to learn more about Foes. Onward to chapter 13, when we get our first appearance from Amethyst. We get an interesting scene in the anime where we pan down to the lake and see the Amethyst basically split up into two twins. And from this scene, I naturally assumed, oh, so they're the kind of gem that can combine or separate if the need arises. And a lot of people in the comments just said, no, that scene was not in the manga. They are two separate gems. That is not just one person separated into two. And sure enough, in the manga, instead of splitting up, 84 just kind of shows up behind 33. Naturally, probably just a stylistic decision, but in that scene in particular, it was a bit confusing as to what the nature of Amethyst was. Later on in chapter 13, after Foes' first patrol, during the post-patrol where Amethyst is just giving info to Jade about what happened that day, we see a much more bustling environment with all of the gyms around versus the solitude that was felt in the anime where it was basically just Jade, Amethyst, and Foes in that dark room. And I do like that sense of solitude, but at the same time, I kind of prefer seeing everybody walking around. It makes it feel more like a lived-in environment and these gyms going on their natural routine. Now, let's talk about chapter 14 for a second, and more specifically, when the Amethysts are trapped by the Lunarians and Foes feels that terror and weakness. I just have to say that I think this scene is much better handled in the manga. And there are two main reasons for that. For one, I feel like the trap coming out,
it's a pretty good scene in the anime, though.
Feels a lot more sudden and unpredictable, where it is terrifying seeing that just one panel and immediately grabbing the Amethyst twins. And of course, that's a byproduct of the medium, but I feel like in the anime, they didn't quite translate that suddenness and terror that this trap invokes. In fact, they have a static shot on the Amethyst twins in the anime, just staring at it for multiple seconds, that almost takes you out of the situation. You're like, run, jump, why are you just standing there? I feel like that situation is communicated much better in the manga, but what I love even more than that element in this scene is Foes. As the Amethysts are being crushed by this trap, we have multiple large panels of Foes just looking surprised and staring at the Amethyst twins. And I love this for two reasons. For one, in the anime, we never really got a shot of Foes' face until after the Amethysts had already been crushed. Whereas in the manga, we see Foes just witnessing this with her own eyes as it's happening and just not doing anything. But what I love even more than that is the expression on Foes' face. She is just so stunned and scared that all she can do is just look up with this blank expression and not do anything. Whereas in the anime, you get a much more terrified expression, which is another approach to take this, but for some reason, I just find the blank expression on Foes' face so much more interesting. And then by the end, when the Amethysts are finally crushed, that blank expression stays on Foe's face as she slowly reaches out for them, wanting to do something. I just think that the way Ichikawa composes this scene in the manga better illustrates what Foe's is feeling. And in this same scene, not really a significant change, but the mountain that they're standing on when Sensei blows up the Lunarians, we get a better shot of it, and the mountain's side actually has a star motif that isn't really shown in the anime at all. It actually just looks like a normal mountain in the anime. It almost makes me wonder why they changed that in the first place. Moving ahead a fair bit to chapter 19, after Foes unleashes her gold powers and Antarcticite is being taken away, we see Foes attacking this initial Lunarian ship that's meant to distract Foes from the main ship that is getting away with Antarcticite. And as Foes attacks it, something that is not shown in the anime is a Lunarian falling off of the ship and another Lunarian reaching for it. This is very interesting, simply because we've never seen the Lunarians give any regard for their comrades. The fact that this Lunarian is reaching over trying to save this Lunarian that's falling does allude to the fact that these people have more sentience and personality than we initially realized. Of course, I feel like that's going to be a huge theme as we continue.
I think so.
Manga, I mean, just due to the final episode of the series, but still, the fact that we see this hint of sentience this early in the manga is really interesting, and I probably would have speculated on it if it was shown in the anime. Moving ahead to chapter
that would have
22,
been
as Foes and
worth
Cinnabar
including.
have their first meeting post-winter. This doesn't really have anything to do with the content and more so the art style, and I just want to talk about the way that Ichikawa draws Foes and Cinnabar in this scene. Pretty much only in this scene, I would say. She definitely developed her style to make Foes and Cinnabar in this scene appear a lot more masculine than she did previously. And what's even more strange is that after this scene, both of them never really look this masculine again. At least not from what I've read. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on the way that Ichikawa is almost testing around art styles for these characters as she's progressing through this manga, and due to the ever-changing personality and appearance of Foes, she's given free reign to do that. Going ahead to chapter 25, as Daya is being chased by Shiro, she's trying to hide, make sure she's not
Shiro
seen.
stuff.
We get a line from her as she's hiding that was not said in the anime at all, and alludes to a future character that we will be seeing later on in the manga. As she's hiding in this grassy area in the school, she says, "I thought Ghost might be around since he's in charge of the long-term recovery facilities, so I came to take a look at the 4th floor. But that little one is out on patrol too." Now it's interesting that this line is omitted, probably because they never planned on getting to that section of the manga in this anime adaptation, so they felt no reason to allude to something when they were already taking up their episode time with the action and entertainment. But it is an interesting detail, and I do wonder what the purpose of these long-term recovery facilities are. And just to take a moment to appreciate this Shiro encounter as a whole, I have to give credit where credit is due, and say that this scene is a lot cooler in the anime, not just because they adapted it, but because they took liberties with it. Huge liberties with the way the action was presented, which in the end made it a lot more
stuff in the anime, really,
fun.
I think.
The entire crawling sequence where Daya is hiding is anime original. When Daya is tossed at the very end of the fight against the ceiling and loses her arms, that's anime original. In the manga, Shiro's tail just whipped them off. And multiple segments of the Bort versus Shiro fight were also anime original, or I guess I should say they were more elaborated on in the sequence, which you would expect.
I mean, that's where the anime really
to praise Orange for going all out in this fight.
has
its
strengths, I think.
That Daya's fierce face as she's fighting Shiro is better in the manga. God, I love that.
No, that is a great face.
Chapter 28.
And she's a great
after
character.
the Shiro revelations have been made, and Foes begins to suspect Sensei of having a connection to the Lunarians, the conversation that follows with Cinnabar is pretty much the exact same as it is in the anime, but I love a difference here where at the end of the conversation where Cinnabar is saying, "I'm still making up my mind on how I feel about Sensei and the secret," she turns to Foes and says, "And you? What are you going to do?" And this line is in the anime, but there's not as much emphasis and storytelling focus put on it as the manga is allowing Ichikawa to do, where she just separates an entire panel with just the speech bubble asking what Foes is going to do. And I love the way that this is handled because it really tells us what Foes is going to be focusing on from here on out. In a way, it alludes to this being Foes'
not really sure how you would translate that to the anime.
In chapter 30, as we see
in the close-up on Cinnabar,
board
probably.
not liking and respecting him as a gem. We get a scene that wasn't adapted
Close
in
enough.
the final episode, and you're going to see this a lot in this final episode. A lot of scenes being rearranged or either just cut out completely. And this is one where Yellow sees Zircon behaving this way, and Zircon is just thinking to himself, no, I can't behave like this in front of her. I need to pretend to be calm. And you just see Zircon in the distance trying to pretend by practicing aerobics. It's just really funny, and Yellow can obviously tell what's going on here. But alright, let's move just a little bit more into chapter 30, and this is where we start getting into the more drastic changes, complete plot details that are left out of the anime. As
Hopefully
Foes is determined to
keeping
find
them
a
for season
sunspot
2.
and interrogate a Lunarian, she comes
Or-
across Bort and Zircon training and about to take on one themselves, and asks them to leave it to her. And this is where we learn
Okay.
about something new called a hollow sunspot, a phantom of a sunspot almost that appears and then disappears shortly after, assumedly because it's a fake, or maybe the Lunarians changed their mind. We still don't know the details about what the hollow sunspot is or why
Interesting.
it appears, but it is an interesting new addition to the way that these Lunarians
Ah.
in the room as Alex and Foes are going over Lunarian information, so Foes can potentially have a better chance of finding one. Something I was wondering about in the anime was why Yellow was just randomly in the room with Alex and Foes as they were going over these Lunarian notes. And in the anime, this is never clarified, never brought up. We just see Yellow in the background and that's it. We
Yeah,
don't get any information as to why she's there.
Guess
laying
I didn't
on
really
these
think about
books.
it,
And I
but-
would guess maybe the anime ran out of time to throw in another line about why she's there, but in the manga we get a line from Alex that says that Yellow is there as a special guest lecturer with significant practical experience. So it's nice to see Yellow helping out. Of course, we see her asleep the very next scene, but I'm sure she did her work. Alright, now it's time for possibly the most interesting difference in the entire manga.
Alright.
As Rose finally captures a Lunarian, is finally getting it to talk. A huge change that was brought up in the finale review is that Cinnabar was actually not the one to appear and start killing the Lunarians.
Oh.
In the manga, it was the Amethyst twins who appeared and ended
Okay.
up killing the Lunarian before Foes could get any more information out of it. And it's clear why they did this in the anime. They clearly wanted some kind of segue into the Foes Cinnabar scene on the hill.
Yeah.
They cut ahead a few
I think
chapters in the manga to reach that scene, so it was better that they placed
Cinnabar is
Cinnabar
probably-
there to give
Cinnabar's
more
probably a
of
bit more fun to
purpose
animate,
and
too.
segue
Her
into that scene. And of
attack
course,
style.
the Amethyst being here instead of Cinnabar changes up the dialogue that they have after the Lunarian attack. But that's not what's really fascinating about this scene and why it's different from its anime counterpart. In the manga, instead of Cinnabar's Mercury just disintegrating the head instantly, we see the Amethyst slice a part of its head off and it falling to the ground. But as it falls to the ground, we hear one more syllable, a syllable that was not spoken at all in the anime. Ah.
Oh.
Ah. Now, I know that's not really much more to
Yeah.
go off, but it is really interesting that they decided to exclude that syllable, but still include the fa. So right now we have F, U, and A. What that could possibly mean, I don't know, but I have a feeling that we will be getting into those answers very soon in the manga. Either way, we haven't even gotten into the most interesting part of this scene. Another syllable is all great and dandy, but we get crucial plot information about these Lunarians and their speech. As the Lunarian is falling to the ground and speaks that syllable, the Amethyst didn't hear a thing. Foes even asks afterwards. She said,
I'm not
"Did you guys hear
surprised.
that? Did you hear that ah?" And they both say no, they clearly didn't. So the question at this point is why? Why didn't the Amethyst hear the Lunarian talk? Could it be due to Foes' ability to talk to the Admirabilis?
Yeah, yeah,
Or
I
is
think
it
it's
something completely different?
probably
I
something
feel
tied to
these
that.
Revelations will be made in the future about what makes Foes so special compared to all of the gyms. Why are her inclusions so compatible with everything? Why is she able to understand the Lunarians? In fact, I think the two of those things might be connected. And
They
finally,
very well could
the
be.
final difference that I have to talk about, just a few pages later in this same chapter 32, we get a nice little monologue from Foes as as she's in the library trying to research these Lunarians more, try to make sense of what just happened, and you may realize that what Foz is saying right now is the line that she says while walking away from Cinnabar in the anime. So I actually like that they took that line and put it in the Cinnabar scene. I think it's a nice line to end the series off on, and of course they couldn't actually start this library scene because this is the exact point that we stop. On the very next page is entirely new territory, beginning with the introduction of a new gym. I'm not even going to look at that. I immediately closed that page as soon as I saw that. I will of course be saving the new territory in chapter 32 to be combined with my eventual chapter 33 review. And that's where we stop. Those are all of the major differences that I could find while reading through the manga and comparing it to the anime.
Well, interesting.
Except for a cliff note I'm going to make, I am not going to be analyzing the Foz Cinnabar scene in the finale. As you know, they skipped ahead quite a few chapters to get that scene into the finale episode.
I see.
So I will be saving that scene and comparing it to its anime counterpart when I get to the chapter in which that scene is involved. Now, I just want to talk about the manga as a whole, what I thought of it, if I think it's better or worse than its anime, and just standout elements to me. And I think anyone who hasn't read the manga yet, the standout aspect that you saw throughout this review is Ichikawa's insane artwork.
Yeah, it's
feels
beautiful.
Like almost
really,
every single
really
panel
is.
I'm looking at a masterpiece, and that is due to the way that Ichikawa uses contrast and scene composition in her work. I don't think I've ever seen blacks and whites used to this degree to paint just a wide range of atmosphere and tone. There's so little gray in this series, and you would think that that would be hard on your eyes, but it just makes it all the more satisfying and fun to read. Her artwork is unlike anything I've ever seen, and she doesn't just rely on this use of black and white. She also has an amazing sense of how to compose a shot. Even the most mundane scenes appear so much more grand because of the way that Ichikawa draws the perspective and framing. Orange did an incredible job adapting a lot of these sequences, and I'm happy that they weren't afraid to also put their own spin on some things and take liberties, because frankly, adapting each and every single panel exactly as it is in the manga not only would be incredibly difficult due to the way that Ichikawa uses her style, but also due to the fact that she takes advantage of the manga medium. A lot of these shots would be harder to convey through animation, and it's a good thing that this series is so visually striking on every single page, because another thing that the manga does that I absolutely love is it tells a large majority of its storytelling and character personalities through visuals alone. Sometimes you will go multiple pages without a single line of dialogue whatsoever, and this just really helped chapters fly by because I was just soaking in so much imagery and learning about the world through that, as opposed to a bunch of dialogue. Of course, there is dialogue in the series, and I want to talk about that as well. As I said before, Ichikawa takes full advantage of the medium she's working in, and due to that, the writing in the manga feels a lot snappier and wittier than it does in the anime. Not only is the writing just exceptional, but the way that Ichikawa places the dialogue on each panel makes it flow so naturally. You can visualize the pace and voices of the characters simply by how Ichikawa places these text bubbles on the panel, and that takes an insane amount of skill. I can't even tell you how many manga I've read where the dialogue feels like an afterthought placed on a panel, and there's not really a flow or a pace to the conversation, and it's the way that it's paced on the page that made it more fun for me to read it than it was for me to listen during the anime. On the topic of the writing and dialogue, I want to get into something that I brought up earlier in the differences, and that is just that dialogue in the manga just makes way more sense than it does in the anime during specific scenes. Now, this can be attributed to two things. Well, for one, I think that the fan translators did a much better job of communicating what characters are saying and what they mean than the official Sentai translation did. There were some very odd word changes in the Sentai translation that just made simple conversations so needlessly complicated. But the second thing that makes the dialogue make more sense,
this is a fan translation
and what I
of the
brought
manga.
up earlier, is framing and flow. And to illustrate my point here, I'm just going to play a scene from the anime and then show you its manga counterpart. So here we go. Take a look at this.
本当にそんなことがあると思うか。食われる前、カタツムリの殻を傷つけなかったか。
築地が乱暴に落としたし、ボルツが踏んづけて穴が開いたりしたけど。ちょっと。俺は 戻す方法を知っているでしょ。
勝手に決めるな。何も言ってない。
Now here is that same scene in the manga. The way the conversation flows is completely different and places emphasis on Cinnabar's inquiry about the shell, and then we get Dai's reaction. The way that Ichikawa composes this scene is supposed to lead you to believe that Cinnabar knows something that we don't, and she might be the key to changing foes back to her original self. In the anime, there is no emphasis, there is no pause, there is no moment where the creators are leading you to believe that Cinnabar knows something. The only clue in we get is the very next line where Daya grabs her and says, "You know how to fix her, right?" And in the manga we can follow why Daya had a sneaking suspicion that Cinnabar knew something. But in the anime, it's out of nowhere. It's like she's reading a script and is going, "Oh, my next line, it's time." And there are multiple cases of this throughout the anime where it feels like the creators are adapting these lines one to one, but they're not really understanding how to pace the conversation and put emphasis where there needs to be emphasis to actually make the conversation and words that they're speaking make sense. This is probably my biggest issue with the way that the anime adapted the manga, and it's what made a lot of scenes in the manga flow a lot better in the manga than they did in the anime. And this is where we get into my final complaint about the adaptation. I swear I'm not trying to hate on the anime too much. I still really enjoy the anime so much, but this does connect back to what I was talking about with the very first difference of Fose's hair. I just feel like Ichikawa's art style has way more personality and charm than what was possible conveyed through the CG. And I know that's a no-duh situation. Like, of course Ichikawa's artwork has more personality than the CG.
Yeah.
But it was while reading and just seeing the way the characters emote, their facial expressions, and the way that Ichikawa transforms their designs based on the situation. It's almost an inverse to the way that CG works, where you have one static model that you can work with for the entire series. I love that Ichikawa isn't afraid to make characters look different than they normally would, just to elevate the tone and atmosphere of the current situation. There are so many examples of this throughout the manga, and I showed quite a few during the differences. And again, not to hate on Orange, they did a great job. Still the best CG animation I've ever seen. It just makes me wonder what could have been, because I have become so attached to the way that Ichikawa draws her characters. I just really love simple art styles in general. So to round out my thoughts on the manga as a whole, I loved it. I loved every single chapter, and I would say that as far as storytelling is concerned, it is better than the anime by a long shot, just due to the translation differences and the way that Ichikawa paces her dialogue. I do have to counter that though, and say that voice acting and a soundtrack is so important to me. It's what engrosses me in these stories in the first place, and I couldn't help but hear the voice actresses in my head as I was reading. So with both of those things in consideration, I don't think you can go wrong either way. I think you're in for an amazing experience whether you start with the manga or the anime, and at that point it's all down to personal preference. But if I was to give my own recommendation, I think I would still say start with the anime and then reread the manga for that extra experience. But that's been all from me for this Houseki no Kuni manga differences review. Thank you all for watching this lengthy video discussing the differences in Houseki no Kuni's manga
Pretty long
and
one.
anime. Again, I really appreciate you guys being patient while I was finding the time to record and edit this video. And before I close out, like I said at the beginning of this video, I do have some information and some questions for you guys. In fact, we might as well just get the question out of the way now. I would like to know the best place to read this series in the future, because as I was rereading these chapters, I do have to say that the last 5 or so chapters did have a sketchy translation. I think they switched translators. For the most part, it was fine, but there was some dialogue that just sounded really off, and there was one interaction that just didn't make any sense at all. So yeah, if you guys could tell me the best place to read this in the future and what translator to read from.
Yeah,
When
it
the
doesn't.
next chapter review comes out. Like I said, I've been very busy recently. I've been really trying to get those episode reviews out
So,
on time while working
over
and
a year
writing
ago
other
now.
videos that I want to make as well. So I'm just letting you guys know now that chapter reviews will not be starting next week.
I mean, these
They
days
might
you can find
potentially
like
be starting
the
week
official
after
manga.
that, but if not the week after that, they will for sure be starting and be uploaded every single Thursday. I hope you guys understand. I've just been really wanting to make more one-off scripted videos about my thoughts on certain series, subjects, etc, etc. Those are the videos that I feel most satisfied and proud of when I finish, so I'm just gonna take a little bit of time to work work on those personal projects of mine. I hope you guys understand, and again, thank you all so much for the support that you've shown me and my channel. Words cannot describe how much I appreciate all of your guys' comments, likes, and encouragement in general. And of course, as usual, have a great day.
Nice. Well, there we go. Now, that was pretty cool. I mean, I'm not really sure. I don't have an informed opinion on, like, the last section of that video with, like, comparing the two, because I haven't read the manga. But it looks good. I mean, the art is beautiful. I get his point there, and it does seem a bit more expressive. But there's just was so much in that anime that I really loved in the way they did it, and I think the CG was to its benefit for the most part. I was really happy with that. I mean, maybe it has some drawbacks, but I think that was a smart decision and really helped make the anime. So, I don't know. And also the translation issue is even a bit more muddled with me since I watched the dub, which is probably different than the official sub. I mean, undoubtedly it is. But I never really saw... it never really felt that off to me. I mean, with how they did. I mean, with a dub, I guess you have to be a bit more direct with how you phrase things. So, and nothing ever seemed that awkward, really. But yeah, maybe some stuff could have been more impactful. I don't know. I mean, I do recall that scene with Diamond and Cinnabar. I think, yeah, it did seem kind of to come a bit out of nowhere that she. That Diamond figured that Cinnabar knew something. Though I mean, Cinnabar was, I don't know. I think it kind of worked. I think it did. Yeah, I don't know. But interesting to hear all that nonetheless. And the differences, the stuff that was taken out of, and in some cases added, like the Shiro fight, was all quite interesting to hear. And yeah, it's cool, and they did change a lot towards the very end. I think they definitely tried, since they have to give it some conclusion for the final episode. So they I guess went ahead to get that Cinnabar scene in there, and brought Cinnabar even into the Lunarian fight instead of Amethyst, to kind of just make for a finale, which I think is a fair decision, though, and that's something I think you can gloss it over when Season 2 comes, hopefully. I mean, I think it will. I read that it had pretty good Blu-ray sales, so hopefully that's enough to convince Orange to make more, because they need to. But we'll see. But yeah, I think from what I was hearing there, I think it would still be pretty easy to continue from there while still kind of going backwards and adapting the stuff we kind of skipped a little bit and including that. I mean, the whole false sunspot, whatever it was called, the one that wasn't like that was either empty or was them backing out. You could introduce that at another time, I think, and it would still make sense. Just, yeah, I think if we do go to Season 2, it shouldn't be that difficult for them. But yeah, just interesting video, interesting to see all this stuff and to just get this perspective. And, yeah, it was cool. Yeah. So, I think that covers it. Hope you enjoyed the reaction. Let me know if you did, and see you in the next one.